Yo, Shortbox Nation, this is Botter, and I'm here to tell you right now that con season starts early this year with the return of Northeast Florida's premier anime, comic book, and sci-fi event, Collective Con. That's right, Northeast Florida's largest pop culture convention returns for its 10th year on March 8th through the 10th at the Prime Osborne Center in Jacksonville, Florida. 10 years of Collective Con, they're pulling all the stops out to make sure this is a can't-miss event. And the guest list they got going, don't even get me started on the guest list. I mean, they've got A-list celebrity guests and voice actors from some of your favorite movies, anime, and video games like Elijah Wood and Sean Ashton, Ray Park, Trisha Helfer, Ross Marquand, Max Middleman, and Bo-Katan herself will be there, Katie Sackhoff. Tell me what other convention is giving you the opportunity to meet Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings, Darth Maul, and One Punch Man all under the same roof. Only at Collective Con. And if you're looking to get some of your favorite comics signed, or if you want to get an original sketch from some of the best comic artists in the world, well, you're in luck, because there'll be plenty of comic and creator guests there, like DC comic artist extraordinaire Clay Mann, Harvey Award-nominated illustrator John Taylor Christopher, Marvel and DC cover artist Chris Stevens, and acclaimed Star Wars author Timothy Zahn. They'll all be at Collective Con this year. And if you're looking to bring the family, or if you want to make a weekend out of it, you're in luck, because there'll be so much going on at Collective Con that weekend in the form of vendors, fan panels, video game tournaments, cosplay contests, after parties, and a bunch of fan events. You can purchase single and 3-day weekend passes now using the link in this episode's show notes, or by going to collectivecon.com to book your tickets and hotel. Buy your tickets now, and I'll see you at Collective Con, March 8th through the 10th. Now let's start the show. In this episode of The Short Box.
The thing is I think a lot of people, when they do interviews, are afraid of leaving the roadmap. And the thing is like, a roadmap is great, but you can't let it take away from the journey. That's a very like Hallmark version of what I'm trying to say. But it's just like, the journey comes from like following your curiosities and following the things you're interested in, whether that's toaster ovens or Stiltman or whatever. If you're going to do something that represents you and represents you well, and is going to be something you're going to enjoy doing for a while, do what works for you and you'll find more success.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Short Box Podcast.
The Short Box Podcast is recorded live from Jacksonville, Florida.
Short Box Nation. You heard the opening, right? Do I need to say any more? You're in for a good one today, all right? Welcome back to the podcast. And if you're new to the show, welcome to the party. This is the Short Box Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about comics and the pop culture they inspire. My name is Botter, and this is episode 392. And if I may be, like, really real with you guys, like 100% honest, because I consider you guys my friends, the existential dread and expectations that comes with planning something cool and big for the 400th episode, well, it's weighing pretty heavy on your boy, all right? I'm having sleepless nights trying to figure out how I'm going to outdo what we've done for 390 episodes so far, but fear not, I'm going to figure it out. I'm also lucky because I'm joined by someone who not only understands what I'm going through, but has already celebrated 400 episodes of his own incredible comic podcast. Matter of fact, he's on episode 402 by the time this one comes out. You heard his voice just now in the opening, and I have no doubt that his name is flashing across the screen on whatever podcast app you're using. So no surprise here, but I've got the one and only David Harper on the show. Now, if you're bashfully or even bluntly wondering, who the hell is David and should I know him? Yes, you absolutely should know who David is. David is the host of the incredible comic podcast Off Panel, and the man who also runs the incomparable comic website Sketched. Sketched is a subscription comic site designed to tell the story behind our favorite comic stories, creators, and the industry through a variety of content types, including deeply researched long-form articles, interactive forums, and of course, the very popular and long-running podcast Off Panel, a podcast that I'm not afraid to say that I'm a huge fan of and one that has inspired me countless times. It's one of the best in the industry. And look, don't even get me started on the parent company and website Sketched. The articles, the interviews, the presentation, the attention to detail, the aesthetic. Look, long story short, if you put the Fader, GQ, and Comic Book Guy in a blender, You'll get David Harper, okay?
Oh my God.
It says, I can't wait to introduce you to the man that Mike Del Mundo himself called the Reggie Miller of comics. I will save all my shameless plugs and announcements for the end of the show. So you can hear about the events I'll be at, like the Duval Comic and Zine Fest taking place in June for all of my Jax peeps. You can hear about this Boom Studios comic bundle giveaway that we're doing. And you can be reminded about how awesome and spoiled our Patreon subscribers are later on in the show after the interview. So without further ado, let's finally set the stage for today's guest of honor, Short Box Nation. Let's welcome for the first time ever, David Harper to the show. David, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I have to say, I have so many... one of my biggest problems about appearing on people's podcasts is I naturally want to interview them about whatever because I'm so used to interviewing people. But I have so many different things I want to ask. I want to ask about this Duval event because I'm so, like, I don't know. All I know is Duval is related to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I want to know more about it. I want to know about what your plans are for 400. I just want to know all of it. Also, I love the fact we both start our podcast with yo, which is very unusual.
Wait a minute. Has it never dawned on me that you started off with... Well, you know what? Yours is not as annoying and extended as mine is. I've kind of like...
Mine is very quick.
Yeah,
I very specifically only do short intros. On my 400th episode, I actually apologize for doing a long intro, but I always say yo, everybody, to kick off every episode. So we're peas in a pod there.
There we go. My yo is become like a part of the show, like a canon. Like when people write in all of our emails, at least in everyone that's been maybe listening for a long time, most of them start off with yo, short box, love the episode, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, I'm going to answer your two questions first because I've got like 100 for you. Duval Comic and Zine Fest. This is the second year they've done it, and it's a celebration of independent comic creators, zine makers, from all over Florida. It's hosted at the Jacksonville Public Library downtown. So super nice library. They did the first event last year, blew everyone's expectations out the water. Big shout outs to the team that ran that event. They had Jim Rugg show up last year for the inaugural event to be like the guest speaker, and they let me interview him because I had already, I've had Jim Rugg on like 3 times. So there was already a rapport there, and he loved the event as well. Someone coming from like that zine independent comic background. Fantastic event. So this will be the second year they do that, but I'll have a link to that in the show notes.
But what is Duval? Like, that's the Jaguars thing. I'm just thinking of The Good Place and Jason Mendoza always shouting out, Duval.
So Duval is the county. Is a county here in Jacksonville. And that's how fucking crazy we are here in Duval specifically, is that we wanted to stand out among all the other counties in Jacksonville and in Florida. And we've got our Duval chant that, originated at the games and via radio. So that's just kind of like become our thing. So if you go to a Jags game, be prepared to not only hear it, but you better take part in it if you know what's good for you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you'll find a lot of things here in town titled like Duval, etc. Duval Comic Zine Fest, Duval Comic Show, things like that. And then what was your second question? I completely
second question was, what are your plans for episode 400? Because I understand the stress of trying to come up with something special. I mean, we're comic fans, right? We got to do something big for the big round numbers.
At the moment, man, I don't know. For 350, I think we did a call-in show or a Q&A show. I don't think I've done a call-in show specifically, so I might go ahead and just bite your idea and do a massive call-in show and just take questions.
I mean, it'd be fun. I started trying to book my guest for 400 around episode 340, and it didn't work out. Jim Lee, coming off panel. Someday it'll happen.
I think we both share Jim Lee as a white whale, and I don't know if Jim Lee does. I mean, he's the president of DC Comics now. I don't know if he's gonna have any time at all for even his live streams and stuff.
He did an interview on NPR this week, and typically when you're competing against NPR, you're not really competing so much as losing endlessly.
Facts. But one can dream, all right? I'm going to keep the podcast going as long as there's even the slimmest chance to have Jim Lee on the show. While we're on tangents and getting warmed up, I rarely bring up sports except for maybe outside of the Jags if they're playing. But I know you're really into basketball, and your NBA tweets are some of my favorites, especially when I'm watching the same game. I'll see what you've got to say about a certain play or something. So let me get this question out the way. We're recording this episode on the Thursday night of Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Miami plays the Celtics in Boston tonight. Ideally, if they win, they close out the series, and then they move on to the finals against the Nuggets. What's your prediction about tonight's game, and who do you got winning the whole thing in the finals?
My prediction is that Boston's going to send it back to Miami. Boston is a disaster, and they should not. I mean, Boston is a disaster, and always you can be a disaster, but they are a more talented team, and they should be in the position they're in. So I think that their talent and the fact that they have home court tonight will drive it back to Miami, but I think Miami will finish it off in 6, and then I think the Nuggets will make pretty short work of them. Because the thing is, I don't know if you read this, Malcolm Brogdon from the Celtics had a really good line about the reason why the Heat have them. And it's because the Heat has a defined identity. They have a defined identity that the Celtics don't have. The Celtics are still trying to find their identity, which is bad when you're in the Eastern Conference Finals. And the Heat do. And the Heat will just hit them, and Jimmy Butler will will their way to the finals. But the Nuggets also have an identity, and they are way more talented than the Heat. So Jokic will be a bit of a problem, even with Bam being an incredible defender.
Man, watching the Nuggets play is like watching a well-oiled machine. It's been crazy to watch them just sweep the freaking Lakers.
Jokic is like he's a conductor. He's not really a basketball player. He controls every facet of the sport, and it is unbelievable. Sometimes even defensively, not as much as the offense, but he's one of a kind. His arms are absolutely disgusting. I feel bad for that guy. He's just constantly getting cut up by everyone. Anyway, so yes, I'm going to call it Heat in 6 and then Nuggets in 5.
It'll be fun to listen back to this episode and see what the predictions are looking like.
What do you got? You got to make your prediction too.
I think the Heat beat the Celtics tonight to win the conference, and I'm going to carry that faith over into the finals, but I don't think it'll come easy at all. I think the Nuggets give the Heat a very hard time. I think they forced them to play their best, and it wouldn't surprise me if that one goes to Game 7. But I'm placing my bet that the Heat take it all the way, and that Jimmy Buckets, a.k.a. Playoff Jimmy, a.k.a. Hemi Butler, reminds us why he got those nicknames. So the Heat all the way for me.
Yeah, understandably.
So in a complete 180 from this topic, figuratively and kind of literally, since we're talking about Miami and Heat, it's no secret that you live in one of the coldest cities in the U.S. Most people who follow you know that you live in Anchorage, Alaska. But I noticed that you describe yourself as a terrible Alaskan in your bio. And I'm curious, like, what's a good Alaskan look like? And what are some of the maybe like unique things you experienced living in Alaska that a Florida boy like myself would not be able to grasp?
So, I mean, I'm Alaskan, born and raised. I was born in Anchorage. I still live in Anchorage. And most Alaskans during the winter will go snowboarding, go skiing, go like cross-country skiing. I do varying things outside in the snow. I don't like snow, and I don't like cold, and I simply choose not to not go out there. And so ultimately, it really just comes down. The reason why I'm a terrible Alaskan is because instead of actually doing winter sports or anything resembling things in the snow, I always say that I hibernate, and that's when I get a lot of writing done, and that's when I get my podcasting done and things of that sort. So the weather works out really well for somebody who has a lot of hobbies like mine, even though I have no hobbies that resemble anything a normal Alaskan would do. I mean, I went snowboarding 3 times, and the last time I went snowboarding, I ended up in the hospital for 2 days. So needless to say, I had enough of that. And anyways, yeah, it really comes down to the fact that winter and I do not mix, and Alaska is famously a place that really, really, really is all about that winter life.
Damn, so that's the key. I was wondering how you get so much done with the website and a podcast. I need to go live in a cold as hell place and just hibernate and stay inside. I can do that. I do that now when it dips below 50 or 40 here in Florida. I'm like, I'm staying inside for the rest of my life.
I mean, it's 51 right now, and it is May 25th. It is terrible. We've had one day over 60 so far this year, which is really bad for us. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that that's the secret. It definitely helps. Lots of coffee helps, but it really, Alaska is a unique place, and it's really amazing. I mean, honestly, like the fact that I can pop on Zoom or Riverside or whatever and do interviews with people all across the world, that really makes it a lot easier because, I mean, I imagine you yourself, it's like you're based in Duval. I mean, could you really imagine reaching out to all the people that you have during your 392 episodes? It's crazy.
It is. Technology has been wonderful. I think back to the early years of trying to figure out how to do record a remote call. I mean, it's easy to call someone, but recording it felt like I needed an engineering degree, like all the different little pieces of tech I would buy and the choppy software I would use. No, it's wonderful to have, technology advanced so far for podcasting purposes. I will definitely be isolating your Duval chant for the rest of time. All right, when the Jag season comes around, best believe that's going to be finding its way online.
Nice.
So I guess being born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska, what's your earliest like comic memory, and does it differ from the moment that officially made you a fan of the comic medium?
The first thing is, it's not the first time I really was involved with comics. I remember buying my first my first comic that I bought with my own allowance. It was Uncanny X-Men number 294, and I bought it from a spinner rack in a grocery store because I love sports cards, and it had a trading card of, I think, Cable inside of it. It was polybagged with a card. And that was not my first memory, though. My first memory was when Superman died, my local comic book shop in Anchorage, Bosco's Comics, Cards, and Games, they had one of their locations was having basically a celebration of life for Superman. And I was small and I love Superman, and I was really excited about the death of Superman's story. And so I went to the celebration of life, and I walked in a parade where I played a kazoo along with everybody else as we walked through this mall celebrating Superman. And looking back on it, there's probably, like, if I did that now, I'd probably be mortified because it was not a, quote unquote cool thing to do. But when I was 7, it was like the biggest deal in my life. I was like, I must celebrate Superman. So I would say that's probably the first big memory involving comics that I have is walking in a very strange celebration of life parade for Superman.
That almost sounds like you joined the cult today. That's what it was. You joined the cult today, the comic cult that day. That was your initiation.
Exactly, yeah.
I love that the first comic that you bought off the spinner rack, X-Men 294, is part 1 of Executioner's Song, which I'll be straight up, yeah. I've got a super soft spot for. I know some people kind of look back at it, kind of funky, but I could not get enough of Executioner's Song, of Strife, of the whole Cable thing. Like, that was probably still one of my favorite X-Men events.
That's a perfect example of, a lot of times people will say, it's too hard to get into comics because all the stuff is crazy and you don't know where to start and all that. Mm-hmm. And I totally get that. That's a very valid thing to say. At the same time, jumping into Executioner's Song, where you're like, wait a second, this guy is the son of these people, but also that guy is the clone of that guy, and they're trying to kill each other, but one of them already shot Professor X with a gun that had the legacy virus in it, and you're just like, what am I reading? And I loved it. I wanted to know more.
Now that you bring it up, that might be the first multi-part comic event series that I ever read. Those were all my dad's comics. And if you want to be someone that really treated them like disposable medium, like disposable media, is my dad. He never had them bagged and boarded. He had all of his comics in an old wooden VCR cabinet, and he would just lay them flat. It wasn't like no rhyme or reason either. He just read them, enjoyed them, and then moved on. But I remember like trying to read it and like, Dad, this story doesn't, like, I was trying to read it like, in order. So X-Men 295, 296, and just like, Dad, this doesn't make any sense. He's like, oh, well, boy, because you got to look at the top, part 1, part 2, part 3. You got to go find these other issues. And he was like, I don't know if I got them. So I think it took me a while to finish Executioner's Song.
Yeah, The first X-Men story I actually read was Extinction Agenda. That was my first really big hook to that. And it was a really early like trade paperback, and I still have it to this day. And I just remember reading that, and like, if that hadn't been in order because it was in a trade paperback, as opposed to like, it was just, I had the X-Men comics and the New Mutants comics and the Uncanny comics or whatever it was. I guess it was X Factor, New Mutants, or an Uncanny X-Men. If I didn't have those, and I just had to like just figure it out myself, I would have totally read in the wrong order and probably quit. But at the same time, that Jim Lee art was quite the hook for me.
It was enough. It was like, I don't really care about the story anyways.
Exactly. I learned Latin from that comic.
Exactly. Before I ask about Sketched and Off Panel, you brought up Bosco's being I guess the first shop you walked in and on that very interesting cult initiation.
Yes.
Are you still shopping at Bosco's? Is that still your local comic shop?
Oh yeah, I went there yesterday. I was told that I'm a very pleasant customer yesterday by one of their employees. I was having a conversation with another person, and this one guy named Vaughn, who's fantastic, was like, "You guys are just pleasant. Could you guys just be here all the time?" And I was like, "I don't think my job would like that, or my wife, but I do like being here." But yeah, Anchorage they've had a few comic shops throughout my life. But really, Bosco's is the only one that's kind of like legit. One of them, I had an ongoing theory that was actually a front for something illegal because I don't think they actually sold anything.
There's been a few of those in Duval for sure.
I like that you said for sure, sort of like I would have said Duval. So, but anyways, yeah. So it was definitely like you would go in there and the person would have a lot of contempt for you as a human being for buying comics, but like. These people would come in and they would like buy sodas and just run away. And there would be like every single comic, he would get hundreds. And I'm like, this is like the worst way to like, I don't know, launder money I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm like a child and I'm just like vaguely familiar with the concept of laundering money because I watched Goodfellas way too young. And I was like, this man is very bad at this. Bosco's though, great shop. Been shopping there since I was a kid. I actually worked in their sports cards department when I was 15. And my boss still works there, and I still check out from him every week.
Is he aware of Off Panel and the popularity of Sketch and all that?
He backs me on Patreon. So
Hell
Pat,
yeah.
Shouts to Pat. He's great. I also beat him in fantasy football, which is a added bonus. Unfortunately, I do that by not drafting Jacksonville Jaguars. But
it might change. It might change in the next couple of years. All right.
Hey, Trevor Lawrence. Actually, I did finish in the Money in My League last year with Trevor Lawrence as one of my main quarterbacks. So there you go.
Come on, there we go. All right. Well, I guess let's get down to brass tacks here. I want to hear how you went from joining the Superman cult to eventually transitioning from fandom to running one of the industry's most treasured comic sites online. And that's not hyperbole, all right, because Declan Shelby himself of Moon Knight fame, of Injection fame, has described Sketched as an oasis of good faith comics journalism chiseled with a canny eye. One hell of a glowing review. How'd you launch Sketched? How'd you get into the comic website and podcast space? Yo, this is Botter. Sorry for interrupting this episode, but I'll keep it brief. I wanted to let you know about a massive sale we have going on over at the Shortbox Store on all of our merchandise and apparel. That's theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com. You can now save 20% off your entire order using the discount code YOO, Y-O-O. So if you've been waiting for the right time to finally buy that gauntlet snapback, or if you ever wanted to buy any of the shirts you see me wear on the podcast, well, now's your chance to get them for a steal. We still have a few sizes left of everything, but they won't last long, and once they're gone, they are gone. And then I mentioned that all of our apparel is screen printed on high quality material. None of that heat transfer or direct to garment stuff. Our shirts are some of the most comfortable ones you'll ever wear, and the hats look even better in person. So wear your support for the Shortbox Nation proudly, knowing that you're going to look damn good doing it. Get to theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com as soon as you can, and don't forget to use that discount code YOO, Y-O-O, to save 20% off your entire order. All of this information can be found in this episode's show notes if you want to get there faster. Thanks for not pressing fast forward. Now back to the show.
It started because I got back into I stopped reading comics after like high school into part of college, and I got back into comics because of Wild Last Man, and loved the comic, started reading comics again. And I was also really, really into like pop punk, emo, screamo music at the time, back when I was in college. And only for like really a year, but I ended up going onto this forum for this website called Absolute Punk. And I went onto that forum and I was talking to people in a thread called Wednesday is New Comic Book Day. This was like basically 2004 to like 2009. I was like talking in this thread with all these people. And one day this one dude was like, I'm starting a comic site. You know, it's called Multiversity Comics. Do you want to check it out? Or does anybody in this thread want to check it out? And I'd been writing a personal blog where I'd write about comics. And I was like, do you need one to write for that? And I ended up writing for them for 5 years, during which we were actually nominated for an Eisner Award for best periodical or comics journalism. And it was really cool. It was where I learned how to do everything. We built something really cool. Multiversity is still running, but I got to a point where I just kind of wanted to do my own thing. And I actually started Sketched originally in 2015. I ran it for a year. Basically, I was just kind of doing my own thing. The problem is over that year, I made precisely $0, and I really tired myself out doing a whole lot of stuff, including Off Panel, which I launched at the same time. And I ended up taking the summer off from the podcast and quitting the website altogether, doing some freelance writing. But then basically like 3 or 4 years later, I brought it back. I had been actually asked by a couple different companies that were like thinking of trying to bring Sketch back. And they wanted to pay me for it and everything. And as I kind of went down that path, I realized I was really excited about the prospect of doing it. And because I'm a really big sports fan and I'd really been paying attention to the way The Athletic had been doing things, and also this basketball site called Cleaning the Glass, I decided to use a similar subscription structure to actually try to monetize it. And it was, I mean, the good news for me is I kind of built up an audience between Multiversity and the first wave of Sketched, and also through the podcast and through my freelance writing, where I'd done things for like Polygon and eventually I'd done like Polygon and Publishers Weekly and The Ringer, and also done some stuff for Skybound. I'd kind of built up some sort of audience. And so I decided to launch it as a subscription site, and that's what I did. And I really just did it. I mean, the reason why I wanted to do my own thing with Sketched is because I appreciate that everyone does like the news, reviews, previews beat, where you have to like write about all this stuff and you have to stay on top of it. But I realized I didn't want to do the things that require timeliness anymore. I just wanted to look at stories that were interesting to me, and I wanted to follow my own curiosity, whether that was like, I mean, my podcast guests, I mean, I've had a very wide mix of people who have different roles in the industry. Like I was looking back through my list and I was like, I had a comics lawyer on the podcast to talk about like what a comics lawyer does and why precisely comic creators need lawyers and all of these things like that. I've had people who started Comic Cons on there. I've had editors, letters, colorists, etc., not just the normal creators. And it's really, I mean, the whole thing has really come down to, like I said, just me following my curiosity and trying to build something that I'm interested in. And thankfully, for some reason, people like it. I cannot explain why they like it. I like it, but I'm kind of biased because I'm the one that's doing it. So, but yeah, crazily enough, I've been writing about comics for almost 14 years now. Wow. And I've been podcasting about comics for 8 years, and Sketched has been around for like a total of like, I guess like 5 years now. And yeah, I do it because I love it, and I wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for that, because it's a lot of work.
Oh yeah. I can only imagine having a website that churns out the content that you put out, in addition to running a weekly podcast. Like, my hat's off to you, and you could definitely add me to that list of people who enjoy what you do. You mentioned looking at sports writers and articles as inspiration. Like on the comic front, were there any websites, podcasts, or other journalists that you were, looking at or for inspiration, or just enjoying their work that might have maybe fed into what you were doing?
This is a terrible answer, but the answer is no. I mean, to be honest, the writers I like the most, like my favorite website ever was Grantland. I don't know if you ever went to Grantland, but once upon a time, I loved Bill Simmons. I don't really love Bill Simmons as much anymore, but Bill Simmons was a big influence for me. I love Zach Lowe. He's a writer for ESPN. I love Mina Kimes. Mina Kimes has done some incredible profiles for ESPN. I've really mostly looked at sports. And I think that's part of the reason why my approach is the way it is I kind of look at comics like somebody looks at a sports writer looks at sports, rather than, I don't really look at the characters as much as the kind of business and the industry and the art form in a very specific way. I'm always looking at the story behind it. That's not to say there's not a lot of really great people. I mean, Heidi McDonald's amazing. Tom Spurgeon, who ran the Comics Reporter and passed away a few years ago, is just an absolute legend. And like, he was just, one of the best to ever do it. There's a lot of people who have done it, but I wouldn't say that they were an influence, because I mostly started reading their stuff after I started, doing what I did. So I guess I could say that they have become influences, but it was mostly the sports influence going into all of it.
Understood. I can respect that. So there was no formal training in regards to like writing. You didn't go to did you go to college for writing? What did you go to college for?
I went to college for marketing, and basically I went to business school. And in the process, I also got an English minor because I always wanted to write. I actually wanted to be a fiction writer, but then I actually realized I really liked for my local newspaper, the Anchorage Daily News, I actually did food reviews, restaurant reviews, and I also did like pop culture writing, where I'd interview like musicians who were coming up and things like that, and would write profiles on those people. So I did some of that, but I never really had any like journalistic training, which is probably why I'm extremely bad at it and still write articles that are like 5,000 words long. For listeners that don't know, which is probably most of you, one of the things that I'm known for is I write a lot of long form features where I research stuff for months at a time. Like, for example, I did the first piece I did when I returned to Sketched after my break was I did an oral history of the Marvel event Annihilation, where I talked to like everybody that was involved with it and then did this big oral history looking back on it. That took me 4 months. And that's a lot of my pieces take several months at a time, and I'm just kind of always cooking them in the background. I also have a day job, so there's a lot of cooking in the background going on all the time. So, it's just, there's a lot of spinning plates. I'm just always just trying to see what I can do to keep things working. And if I get overwhelmed, I just take a break and give everyone else a break too.
What would you be reporting on and writing this intensely if it wasn't about comics? You mentioned sports and being a foodie at one point. Like, do you have any other passions or hobbies that you feel like you could dedicate this much time and energy to if it wasn't comics?
Basketball. The answer is basketball. To be honest, I was talking to somebody in my shop yesterday, and he was like, yeah, you sure know a lot about, basketball. And I was like, I told him, he works in the comics department, and I was just like, I like basketball more than I like comics. And that's true. I actually like sports in general more than I like comics. That's not to say I don't like comics. I just really like sports. And I think either basketball or like this would be, this is a very small niche of people who can get a job in this, but fantasy baseball. I'm very good at fantasy baseball. It is one of my true strengths in life is fantasy baseball. Another one is shuffleboard. I'm very good at shuffleboard. I can't really write about shuffleboard though, so that one's probably out. So I would say one of those two. My dream job would be if I could be a traveling food journalist, that would be great. I just want to get paid to travel and eat food, but I'm pretty sure everyone would want that job. So that's not really unique. So I think that those places would be the ones I would focus on. The problem is there's so much good writing about basketball already. And it's kind of, I'm not saying it'd be hard to get in there, but at the same time, I kind of feel like I'd rather just read like, I don't know, the amazing people who are already working in that space. And there's just like, there's just so many really, really amazing books and articles that come out from that space. And it's really an amazing time to be a basketball fan for that reason.
Yeah. You brought up your day job a few times. I understand you work in digital marketing, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Does your day job play a role in like the attention to the design and aesthetic of Sketch? Because that is something I thoroughly appreciate, is how clean the website is, how good it looks, and the presentation overall is, chef's kiss. Does that come from the day job working in digital marketing, or does it come from somewhere else?
It comes from the fact that I was smart enough to hire people that I know who are really good at doing this stuff. So, for example, Sketch's original logo and design was created by somebody I worked with at my advertising agent. I work in an advertising agency as the vice president of digital marketing. and vice president of digital. That's just digital. And back when I first started, there was this amazing art director who had started a business as a web developer. And I worked with his team to come up with the original version of Sketched. And then when I was bringing it back, there was another web developer I'd met who had a friend who had done like app work for like the NHL and things like that. And I worked with him to come up with the new version where like one of the things I really wanted to include was footnotes that you could click on and it would bring up a little note about it. And he worked that in there. And then like for Off Panel's logo was created by, in my opinion, the best designer in all of Alaska. He used to work for my agency. He's now freelance and he is just a remarkable talent. And I pitched him on the idea and he probably thought I was drunk and terrible at suggestions, but he came up with something really fantastic. And I've kept it ever since. And so I would say that my job helped me most in the sense that it helped me know what I don't know. And it helped me know people that do know the things that I don't know.
I work in marketing. I work on the marketing side. I'm a traffic manager. So more on like the project management side, but I work closely with like a design team. And I'll say the impact it's had on the way I view comics, especially like the design, the packaging, the presentation. It definitely has been very helpful in like even like the podcast stuff too, like rethinking how, what you put out into the world and things like that. And now I'm like familiar with like names like, is it David Mueller?
Tom Mueller.
Thank you so much. Tom Mueller.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's why I'm gravitated towards Sketch is because you put a spotlight on folks outside of like the core creative teams that most people would think, like the designers, the lawyers, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, Tom is great. One of my earliest features I did for Sketch was actually on how much design was kind of becoming a bigger factor in comics. This was like back in like 26. I got to kick out my cat. Now he's headbutting my microphone. 1 second.
Oh, good.
Kubo, what are you doing? The funny thing is the other one is just now sleeping in a bed next to me and is probably going to go and stare at the door and then they're going to start yelling at each other. But anyways, I did a feature on design in comics back in like 2015 or 2016 where I talked to Tom and Jonathan Hickman and a bunch of other people who do design in comics. And I don't know. I mean, that stuff is really important because the design for everything is such a huge factor in terms of how you engage with stories and how you, I don't know if people even will continue reading. That was my big thing for Sketches. Like, I didn't really care about flashiness. I just wanted it to be easy to read. And the subscription model also allows me to not have ads, which means that I don't get gunked up with a bunch of video ads that pop up everywhere, which, I get. I mean, if you're a website that has to have that, that is something that today's structure requires for a lot of websites. But thankfully, the subscription model allows me to have 0 ads. Just like with, I don't know how you feel about it, but it's like with my podcast, I have like a list of people who want to advertise, and I have a cap of 2 people who can advertise at one time because I don't want listeners' experiences to be worse. I mean, I know it's a terrible business sense. Is like, I want to make less money. So listeners who pay me, patrons pay me stuff, but it's just like listeners can have a better experience. But I would rather produce a good podcast than like have one more sponsor, if that makes sense.
I think 2 has always been I don't think we've ever run more than really 1. I try to go about sponsorships in a unique way, and you'll probably be experiencing that here in a couple minutes when we do Fistful of Comics. But yeah, I'm on board for that because I like to think of the podcast. It's not like you can design outside of the cover art and maybe your episode artwork. You can't apply like a lot of graphic elements to the podcast. Like you've got to think about the presentation and design in a completely different way. And I think the listener experience is at the very top of that. So I'm of the same mindset as well. I don't want my podcast to feel like a shitty mobile app with a bunch of ads that you have to, close and stuff like that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, hit it.
When it comes to like when you're coming up with, you have a guest on and you're coming up with how you approach the interview and everything, like what is your approach? Like, do you have like something that you view as like a successful approach to an interview or what is your approach in general, I guess?
I'm glad you asked this because I actually I was listening to 400 and your interview with Hickman, and I think it was in the 400 you mentioned your approach was to find the story in your interviews. Yeah. And when I heard you say that, I was like, huh. have I been doing that? I know it's not a conscious thing where I'm asking, what's this person's story? What is the story of or the pitch behind it? But I think unconsciously, I try to find like, what is it about this person's story that might resonate with a listener that either enjoys comics from strictly a fan perspective or someone that's inspiring to be a comic creator or do what they do. I think I try to find like the connection is the only one that comes to mind, but the connection of like, what is the connection between this person and a listener? Like, what is that arc? What is that story arc in their life that, would give someone inspiration or new information or just strictly entertain? I think I go about it that way. I try to like give you a very quick dilution of like, their career, especially if like a creator. And then we try to find like, what are those pieces that would resonate with someone else that maybe doesn't have the exact same talent or situation or stories.
I think that's a good approach too, because not everyone's going to have read every comic by every guest. And so it's like, if you're going to get deep in the weeds about like, what were your thoughts when you were writing Detective Comics 833? And I'm like, apologies to whoever actually wrote that comic, but it's just like, not everyone's going to know that. Not everyone's going to know what happened in every single comic. So digging in the weeds like that becomes like an exclusionary approach. And so I think it's good, you saying what you do. It's just, that's a way to bring listeners into the story, I think, a little bit better.
Yeah. Some of the best compliments I've ever gotten about the podcast have come from people who don't read comics at all, that gave an episode a shot because the interview sounded interesting and they didn't feel lost. Like, that is always my goal and I think sometimes that holds me back from maybe appealing to maybe more serious, quote unquote, serious comic collectors or readers. I like to keep it high level enough where someone could just jump in and have an entertaining listening experience, but still inside baseball enough where like, a comic guru could be like, oh, he knows his stuff. So I think walking that fine line of offering I think I look at it like, this is still a podcast. We happen to talk about comics, but I want to appeal to as many people as possible. I think I'm trying to put out a quality product that can be enjoyed by all. So I bring that into like the interviews and stuff like that.
That is a much smarter approach than me, because my approach is basically, I described it to my wife of like, I'm not really like the 401 class, but I'm probably like the 301 class for, I'm like the third level where it's
junior year.
It can be very inside baseball. I know a lot of creators and retailers listen to my podcast, and I think it's because it's like very in the weeds in that sort of way. And it's like a bunch of the wonks, like the people who are really into this sort of stuff listen to it. But I imagine if you're just like, somebody who occasionally reads comics, you probably listen to it and are like, what is this dude talking about, and who is Stiltman?
Yeah. I'm going to get to that Stiltman thing here in a sec, but you brought up your wife, and I learned from episode 400 that she's involved in some of the, I guess, the behind the scenes stuff for a sketch, right? Is it strictly design? She's an artist, right?
Yeah, she's an architect, and she does graphic design stuff too. But so she does, she updates all my podcast headers to make sure that they have like the right name and all this stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
She actually designed all of my books. She learned, she already knew InDesign, but she really got in the weeds on that and actually figured out how to lay out an entire book. And so I have 4 print annuals, all of which are laid out by her, and she does a fantastic job. And I mean, she is so talented. It is crazy. She is way better at what she does than I am at mine. And she does a very good job of making me look like I know what I'm doing. And I don't know. I mean, it's also like, it's funny. One of my early podcasts, I remember this one guest, I told him that I had my wife read my articles sometimes just to give her my perspective as a person who doesn't read comics. And he was like, you shouldn't do that. That's crazy. And I'm just like, why? And he was like, because she doesn't know comics. And I'm like, that's precisely why I do get her to read comics or read my articles, because if she understands it and is entertained by it, then it's probably going to be pretty effective for people who like just come into it without knowing a lot about it. Like, I don't necessarily want to be that 301 person. It's just kind of how I end up being. And anyways, she's very good at what she does, and she is the best sounding board a person could ever ask for. She's amazing. Amber, you rule. You're not going to listen to this. Whatever.
Big shout out to Amber.
Yeah, big shouts to Amber.
What's your advice for someone who's trying to maybe bring their significant other, partner, or just friend or, acquaintance into the world of comics but doesn't know where to start? Like, do you have any advice on how to get someone into comics?
there's two levels to it. One, if they don't want to, you can't force it. I mean, my wife doesn't read comics. That said, she does read or watch anime, so I did get her some manga, and she's read some of the manga, so that's good. I look back on it. There's this one retailer, John Hendrick, who co-owns Dublin's Big Bang Comics. He's amazing. John is fantastic. And John, basically what he does is when somebody comes in and they haven't read comics before, he just asks them questions. It's like, what's a book you really like? What's a show you really like? What's a movie you really like? Listens to those questions, takes that information in, and then comes up with something for them. So I think it really comes down to more about listening to what a person likes and or wants and trying to find something that fits them. There's, as much as we want to act like there's like universal comics out there, I mean, there might be, but for the most part, you'd be a lot better off trying to tailor something to somebody. So it really just comes down to listening to what the person wants. If the answer is they don't want to read comics, that's fine. But if the answer is they're interested, then find out what other things they like, and then try to tailor something to them off that.
My best friend came up with my favorite approach to it, and that's asking what movies or TV shows they like, and kind of going from the genre perspective. I always found that kind of worked as well.
Yeah.
Now, I bring up significant others because this one comes from my girlfriend, who is a complete badass. She's got her own company. She works in digital marketing in logistics. I mean, she builds websites. She's very hypercritical about websites as well. And I was telling her about, this interview and having you on, and how much I really liked, the presentation for Sketch. And she's like, all right, let me take a look at this. And David, you got an audible, which she never gives. But I've shown her other comic websites and apps, and she'll tear them apart. But for yours, you got a very strong,
I'll take that.
And she did have a question for you. What's the value of a website in today's day and age of like social media? I feel like most people opt out to have a social media profile and things like that instead of, having a real estate on the web per se. Like, what is the value of a website in your eyes?
I think that in this age of algorithms and breaking social media sites and all those things like that, I mean, I've talked to people who think that we're actually moving back towards websites, like especially for comics. Some people have told me they're like, I think we're going to go back to creator websites being a really big deal. And I could absolutely see it. A website on its own has no value. You have to have like a distinct point of view, and you have to have something that you bring to the world and that like distinguishes you. Like, there's comic sites that have their own thing. It's like, The Beat offers really, really great insight into the world of comics business and stuff like that. Bleeding Cool brings you rumors and brings you a lot of stuff before you're going to find it out elsewhere. Like Women Write About Comics bring you amazing criticism and really great insight into the world, a lot of comics that you wouldn't actually come across otherwise. I mean, there's panel by panel. Panel by panel isn't a website, but panel by panel is like a PDF based, basically digital magazine of criticism. And all of them have their own point of views. And the value to a website doesn't exist without having a good idea behind it or a good structure and a good approach. And so I think the value is that you offer a one-stop shop for something very, specific. And especially in the social media era, because like social media, it's like, here's the thing. I could make a tweet. I could create a tweet that has almost no engagement. Here, actually, that's a perfect example. So it's like, I will run articles that I open up to non-subscribers and like get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of engagements, like retweets, likes, everything like that. 0 subscriptions to the site. And then I'll run one that's like deep inside baseball, wonky stuff. Like today I wrote an article about how people who shop at comic shops, their habits are shifting. And I interviewed a bunch of readers and I wrote about that and talked about why these things are happening, some of the commonalities that are happening. And I have only the very first part is before the paywall. And I've gotten like 8 subscriptions today from that. And I have, I think, a total of like 5 likes and like 2 retweets. And so the question becomes, for me, it's not a question of what's the value of the website. The question is, what's the value of social media in that situation? Because I consider engagement, like likes and retweets, generally speaking, I consider that to be kind of low calorie engagement. For me, like the metric is subscriptions. And the metric is like, are people reading this and engaging with it? And so the weird thing is like switching to the subscription model has actually changed my kind of paradigm, where social media isn't as valuable, except for in the sense that it raises awareness of what I do. So I guess the value of the website comes down to, it's kind of my everything. It's the place you'll find Off Panel. It's the place that you'll find all my writing. It's the place you'll find me. And the weird thing is I think for a lot of people, it's like, I'm David Harper, but I'm also the sketched guy or the off panel guy. And so, or the sketched D guy. A lot of times people mispronounce sketched, which is funny because it's a fake word. So it's totally understandable. But anyways, yeah, I mean, it's probably imperfect answer to, what she was asking about. But at the same time, that's kind of my view on it. It's in 2023, I just don't know if social media is as valuable as it once was, beyond like an advertising standpoint. Like organic reach is just terrible, and sometimes it's not even that meaningful.
Not to speak for her, but I've heard her speak a lot about the value of owning your own content, having, owning a spot on the web, and, equating a website to having real estate instead of like, renting out a social media profile or something like that. So well said. And I can't wait for her to hear this part. I want to take it back to a recent article about your reading habits and approach to prioritizing what you read, and shared something called the Immediacy Index, which I thought was pretty fucking badass, for lack of better terms. All right. I feel like that is a conversation that you always bring up with, other readers, with other friends that are into comics. It always feels like we're always looking for some sort of magic formula to figure out what's the best way to go about reading all these books I buy. Like, how do I prioritize this and that? And how do I get caught up? And it sounds like you might have figured that out with this index. Can you explain the Immediacy Index?
Well, first off, it's total nonsense. I mean, it's kind of like it's me trying to make method to my madness. Mostly it's madness, but
most of us are looking for that, though.
And you brought up, you brought my wife earlier. My wife did all the graphics for that, so shouts to Amber once again. But I mean, basically, it just kind of came down to like, I have like some arbitrary rules to my reading habits. Like if I don't read 3 issues in a row before, if I have to buy 3 issues in a row and I don't read it, as a rule, I drop it. It's just, I'm out. And because if I let it sit for that long, it's clear that I don't like it as much as I think I do, even though I tell myself I like it. I mean, a lot of it's just formalizing those rules, and then also kind of thinking about what comics really mean to me and what the urgency is behind it, and then creating kind of a hierarchy to it. So it's like the top one is, what was it? Is the day one is the things I read first thing. And like, those are typically like X-Men books or like Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips comics. The funny thing is I even have some distinctions in there between like Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips single issues versus graphic novels. Or like, Consequential Big 2. That's like another one of them. Consequential Big 2 is like, I always read events first because I don't want them to have them spoiled. It's like, I don't want, Judgment Day or Dark Crisis to be spoiled for me or whatever. So I read those first so I can get ahead of the curve. And also it's like, a lot of it comes down to, I found a lot of my biases lean towards things that entertain me versus things that are like very well crafted. Not that all the books don't entertain me, but it's like, would I rather read Once and Future? That was a Kieran Gillen and Dan Mora book. Yep. Would I rather read that, which entertains the living hell out of me? Or would I rather read something like Die by Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans, another really good comic that is very dark, and I don't want to say it's miserable to read, but it can be pretty dark. And so it's like, they're both equally good comics, but one is like watching Die Hard and the other one is like watching, I don't know, something very dark. And so it's like, I have a natural lead towards entertainment. And so a lot of this really just comes down to the fact that I'm a simple person who just wants to be entertained. That's really the long and the short of it.
There were some good tips in there that I plan on adopting. Another long form that caught my eye that I haven't gotten around to reading yet. Pizza with all the extras. The story behind the X-Men and Pizza Hut promotion 30 years later. You best believe that is at the very top of my reading pile. I won't ask you to go into a long diatribe about everything about it, but can you share one fact that you found out during your research that might blow my mind about the whole Pizza Hut X-Men promotion?
Do you know who Chris Bachalo is, the artist?
Come on, David. Don't disrespect me like that.
So here's you would learn this if you read the article, but the gist of the article is in 1993, there was a Pizza Hut promotion where they had all these placemats and a special personal pan pizza box and cups and all this stuff. I talked to the dudes who did it and who put all of that together, and I tracked them down. And it was partially inspired because artist Russell Dauterman, every time I would bring it up, he's like, you need to write about this. You need to write about this. And I'm like, get off my back, Russell. I do what I want. And eventually I just did what Russell wanted, and he was totally right. But Chris Bachalo, so basically at that point, he was a Vertigo artist. He had mostly done stuff related to, he had done a Death series, and he was not somebody who'd ever drawn for Marvel at that point. He had done an Incredible Hulk issue, but it hadn't been released. And basically what ended up happening is the dudes who were making it, who were putting this whole project together, Dana Mooreshead and Mike Thomas. Wait, hold on a second. I got to confirm that. I don't want to get that wrong. Dana Mooreshead and Mike Thomas. So those two guys were putting this all together. They were just like listing off artists that they really liked. And they were like, we should get Chris Bachalo to do one. And so they got Chris Bachalo to do one. He was like, are you sure you want me to do this? And they're like, yeah, you're awesome. So he apparently used to go to 7-Eleven and have superhero cups with Slurpees in it. And so he had some nostalgia for it. So he dug into that and did kind of like a Jim Lee inspired thing. And that was done. He went back to his Vertigo work. And so one night, Dana Mooreshead was in his office and Scott Lobdell comes in and he's like crestfallen because the person who was supposed to draw X-Men Unlimited #1 had to back out. Something happened with their scheduling. And he was like, do you know anyone that I could get for this book? And showed him the cup that Bachalo did. And he's like, this guy's great. And they ended up calling Bachalo right then. Bachalo declined and then called back a little bit later because he said his wife said he'd be crazy if he didn't do it. So he threw his name in there. And that is the only reason. Well, that's not the only reason, but that was the first time Chris Bachalo worked on the X-Men, and shortly thereafter he did Generation X with Scott Lobdell. And it's entirely possible, there's no way to tell, but it's entirely possible without that Pizza Hut project, Chris Bachalo would have never drawn an X-Men comic.
That was,
which is
my
crazy.
Mind being blown. Sound effect. That is insane.
I mean, he's drawn so many X-Men comics too.
Yeah, he's like synonymous with X-Men. And to tell me that the origin of it comes from terrible pizza.
Hey, I'll tell you what, when you're 9 years old and it has a bunch of X-Men stuff, it was the best pizza in the world. Yeah. Besides Godfather's dessert pizza. Shouts to Godfather's dessert pizza.
My first job was at Domino's, and I would constantly berate my boss, like, we never did anything cool like Pizza Hut X-Men. Like, I would just let him know that all the time.
I mean, the funny thing is, like, that article is actually a really good kind of microcosm for what I try to do. I try to find stories that are really interesting to me, and my hope is that if they're really interesting to me, they would be interesting to someone else. Do you know who Raina Telgemeier is?
No, I'm not familiar.
Raina Telgemeier is one of the most popular cartoonists for like kind of middle grade and kids comics. She did a book called Smile, and she sold like millions and millions of copies. She's like the Beatles to children. She came up and she spoke at my comic shop, Bosco's, this past weekend, along with a bunch of schools and everything. And it was packed. It was crazy. And she had this line that I really loved where she said, she does a lot of autobio stuff. And she said that basically something along the lines of like the personal can be universal. And I think that that's kind of what I try to do. It's not that I'm trying to make universal stuff, but I'm trying to do things that I'm really passionate about. And if I write about those things, maybe other people are passionate about it too. And sometimes I succeed and other times I don't as much.
Well, this one definitely succeeded in my eyes. And I think you mentioned like your curiosity being like a driving factor in the topics and things that you cover and what sets you apart. And I got to co-sign that. I look at just the list of long form content you got and some of these headlines and subjects. It's like, damn, I'm glad someone is thinking like about these like obscure, things and wanting to like bring them to the light. So, kudos to you on that, man.
I'll tell you that Pizza Hut article was probably the most shared article I've ever done. And the thing that was really cool for me is I got an email from the people who created X-Men the animated series telling me how good of a job I did. And I was like,
oh, hell yeah.
That was unexpected, and I appreciate it.
That's awesome. On the topic of time management, so you've given us some good tidbits in regards to maybe how to prioritize our stack of books. But on your 400th episode, you received a question from a listener asking about like the secret behind your longevity and how you're able to balance both the website and the podcast for so long. And you mentioned this set of principles that you got. You called them the 5 Fs. And I think you do a much better job at telling us and recapping that. But I think what you shared was really helpful from, someone like myself that's, sometimes getting to that point of feeling burnt out or trying to figure out how do I balance work, regular life, and a podcast. Can you share the 5 Fs?
Well, the funny thing is that similarly to the Immediacy Index was more of like a impromptu formalization. Oh yeah, that entire thing I freestyled. But I mean, I'm trying to remember. Okay, the first one was fast. I am very fast at what I do. One of the things that always has stood out to me is the things that take a lot of people a long time to write don't take me that long. Like I remember back when I wrote at Multiversity, people would take like hours and hours and hours to write reviews, and I would write my entire review in like 15 minutes. They were also probably better at that than I was, but at the same time, what are you going to do? So I'm fast. Another one I remember is that I was fortunate. Fortunate in the sense that my wife supports me, my job supports me. I have a lot of people who, for some reason, decide to respond to my emails, despite the fact that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that when they see my email, they should just press delete. And then another one is flexible. I have a very flexible schedule thanks to my day job. I have spent years trying to do everything I can to try to add flexibility to my schedule, and they are very accommodating of me, which is really great. I remember one of them was fake. Oh no, one was foolish. Then the fourth one was foolish.
The fifth one was fake. It's all fake.
Fifth one was fake. Fourth one was foolish. Foolish because I put all this stuff on me and I just keep going. Basically, I don't know when to quit, and so foolishness is my friend in that case. And then the fifth one is fake. Fake in the sense that I do feel burnt out. I feel, there's a lot of times where I'm stressed out and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get this done. Like a good example was this week's feature. I was having a really tough day on Monday. I was not having it mentally. I just couldn't get it done. And I decided instead of trying to put up something that wasn't as good on Tuesday, I just punted it to Thursday and I got it up today and it's great. I think it turned out really well. People seem to really like it. And I think that, it's not that I'm always fake, but I think it's important to realize that when you don't have it, and if you can push it, it's better to push it and have something good rather than forcing yourself to put something out there just to put something out there. I mean, I have 402 published podcasts as the time this goes up, plus a bunch of ones that are unnumbered, so like 423. But there's actually entire episodes that I've killed because I was just like, this is not my standard, and I will not run this. And sometimes that's with companies who are not very happy about that. But
gotta stick to your guns.
I gotta live up to the standards I have for myself.
Well said. What was the fake was the fifth one? What was the fourth F?
Foolish.
Those were the two that really resonated with me when I heard you first explain it. I was like, yeah, I know that's me. Foolish, and I fake it till I make it.
Yeah.
Foolish in the sense that I take on things that I'm like, you don't got no bandwidth for this shit. What are you doing?
Here's the thing: is like, do you like what you do?
I think the reason why I have not stopped podcasting, because there's been a few milestones where I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a month off or I'm going to take a year off. I think it's because I couldn't imagine not doing this, not sharing my hobbies and talking about this thing that I love so much. It's very hard for me to imagine doing anything else, on a Thursday night, before
the Heat lose to the Celtics. But
we'll
I'm sorry
about that. All right, Dave.
But I mean, I will say this: you're good at what you do, and you like what you do, so why not, right?
Well said. Let's switch gears to something a little more lighthearted, and let's address the elephant in the room, David. Where does the origin of your Stiltman fandom, and it's not even really fandom, it's kind of like borderline obsession, come from? For our audio listeners, David is pointing at a really cool. Oh, that's the Stiltman Marvel Legends. That was a Build-A-Figure, right? Was that a Build-A-Figure?
with extra legs. I actually had people mail me legs. Yeah.
So is that the stock? I guess.
No. His stock is. I think there's 2 extra legs I added on top of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had somebody who bought Hand Ninjas, and they just mailed me the legs. And so I have extra legs because of it. I actually have more legs than just the one that's up there, but at this point, it's basically maximum ceiling height. So where are you at? Did you ask where my origin
where
of
does
it?
Where does this obsession with Stiltman come from? And can you give me, I'm up here challenging you now. Can you give me one trivia that would blow my mind about Stiltman?
So,
2-part question.
The funny thing is, I'm not going to say I don't love Stiltman, but to some degree, it kind of started as a bit. And then it just continued and kept going and going and going. And I do really love Stiltman. I think all versions of Stiltman are great. And part of it is because I have a deep love for the kind of like grinders of the world, the ones who really aren't that good at what they do, but they just keep doing it because it's all they know. And I mean, objectively, Stiltman is a stupid idea. It is just a terrible idea. Like any number of things, like, I don't know, tripping hazards, or, I mean, at one point he actually gets taken out by cockroaches when Daredevil realizes he has cockroaches in his suit because he had in storage for so long, and he lives in New York City. He's gotten taken out by a lot of really, really remarkably dumb and easy things that only Stiltman would get taken out by. But the thing that I love about it is the fact that it's an objectively dumb idea that everyone in the universe knows is dumb. And yet, at least 6 people in the Marvel Universe have taken that identity and tried to make it work, which tells you that there's like a desperation amongst these grinders that you are ready and willing to try out a very dumb idea to make success happen. And if there's anything more relatable than trying out dumb ideas just to try to make success happen, I can't think of many. And I don't know. I've always found the idea of like this legacy in superhero comics to be really interesting. It's like, Batman begets Nightwing, Nightwing begets Robin, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these different characters. But the fact that the legacy even exists with somebody like Stiltman, an objectively insane character that like started off. I mean, here's my little fact for you. This is I highly doubt you've read Daredevil #8, but the best part about Stiltman is like, unlike a lot of technology villains, he didn't even invent his stilts. He stole his stilts. Wilbur Day stole his stilts and then caused a bunch of havoc, which included stilting up so high that he was at a garden party at a skyscraper, at which point he used a vacuum cleaner to like suck up everyone's jewels and money, and then he bounced. He's just a deeply absurd character. And I've always loved the absurd characters that work because of comic logic, but also work because just sometimes people make bad decisions, and sometimes those decisions include putting really long stilts on your legs and walking around and trying to commit crimes.
The worst kind of decision right there.
It's a terrible decision.
I'll have you know, I actually have read Daredevil #8. When I was first getting into comics, it was the House of Marvel in my house. My dad only, for the most part, like his collection was like 99% Marvel and then some DC, a little bit of Image here. But when I first got into comics, I read through everything that he had. And he was always kind of preaching to me of like going back and reading like the original stuff, and so you could appreciate what was out then. So he would buy me, and I would also spend a lot of my hard-earned Domino's non-X-Men funny money on like essential Marvel books. And I remember reading the Essential Daredevil was like one of the very first ones I bought, and thinking, wow. I remember actually I was not the biggest fan of Daredevil then. I was like, this is silly. Like all his heroes are silly. The Matador, the Owl, Stiltman. But obviously he's quickly grown on me,
Oh yeah, I mean, today. Daredevil. I would say, I was about to say, in my opinion, the best Marvel comic ever, but I would say objectively the best Marvel comic ever. It's really hard to disagree with that. I mean, some people would say Fantastic Four, but I would disagree with them. But anyways, yeah, Stiltman. I mean, I love the fact that also for some reason this stilt-based hero starts the comic in Daredevil number 8 by like triggering a runaway car to distract Daredevil from doing his weird like garden party heists. It was completely unnecessary. The whole thing is just remarkably dumb. I love it so much.
Yeah, Stillman is the walking embodiment of number 4 and number 5F right there. Foolish and fake.
It was also the last time that he was respected, his first appearance. No more respect for Stiltman.
Not even when Turk took over the mantle.
Oh, man. I love Turk, too. Turk is
awesome.
He's another grinder. I love him. And also, he was great in the Netflix series. I love that he was in all of them.
Yes, he was. He was one of my favorite supporting. He might be like probably my favorite supporting cast member in Miller's Daredevil run. Like Turk could not catch a break, but for some reason he never like, for a guy that was like steadily snitching on everybody, he never got too much in trouble with,
He reminds me of this is like a terrible story to tell about myself, but I remember one time talking to a person who worked in a bar, and I was like, we were talking about like people getting kicked out of bars. I have a friend who gets kicked out of or used to get kicked out of bars a lot, even when he would just be like leaning against the wall doing nothing. And he was just like, some people have like bad vibes.
The worst luck. Yeah.
And he told me that this was like way back in the day, but he told me he told me that I was known in the bar community as somebody that just had a really good time and made sure other people had a good time. And so there was a general rule that I didn't get kicked out of places, which is part of the reason why I've never been kicked out of a bar. And I was like, that's pretty nice. I feel like that's Turk's thing too. Turk is just like, it's hard to get mad at him for snitching on you because he's just got great vibes.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, well said. Well, be more like Turk, all right? Be more like Turk people.
Well, in certain ways. He is also a criminal.
I guess I tend to overlook that part a lot. All right.
Be a cool dude. Maybe don't. Cool dudes, no crimes. Let's go with that route.
There we go. Let's start off with that first, all right? David, who's on your comic Mount Rushmore? Like, if you had to pick a top 4 favorite comic creators, maybe specifically artists, who would be on that list?
I'm not going to pick the best. I'm going to pick my favorites. The first two that come to mind are David Mazzucchelli and Stuart Immonen. I love both of them so much. I actually have you can't see it, but I have a Stuart Immonen page over there. David Mazzucchelli, I've tried to get on the podcast a number of times. He hasn't made a comic since 2009, I think. So
a long time.
Understandably, he has not come on. God, let's think. All right. I'm going to give the first names that pop in my head. A cartoonist named Faith Erin Hicks. I absolutely love Faith Erin Hicks. She is absolutely incredible. And her art, she's like the best character actor in comics. She's fantastic. And fourth, let's see. Javier Rodriguez. I love Javier Rodriguez. That's not actually, I'm not going to say that it's my Mount Rushmore, but that is my Mount Rushmore for where my brain is right now. Javier Rodriguez, he was the colorist of Daredevil, and then he started drawing Daredevil, and he's drawn Defenders, and he's drawn
yes, he's
a whole bunch of things. He is unbelievable. I think that he is the best superhero artist working today, and if he did anything else, he would be the best that artist working today, because Javier Rodriguez rules.
He's not the same artist that did the history of the Marvel Universe. Oh, he was. Yeah, no, his work is fantastic. His work reminds, like, I could put him in the same pool. Sometimes I get mixed up, to be honest. I used to get mixed up between him, Paulo Rivera, and Marcos Martin. Like, they always kind of had a similar vibe. And I don't know if it was the color. Actually, thinking about it, he might have colored all of them. But something about, like, their line art and their body composition and just, like, this retro kind of old soul to their artwork. I used to get them mixed up all the time.
I think Paolo's the only one that's kind of not necessarily a fit in there, but the commonality is they all worked on Mark Waid's Daredevil run too, and so they kind of had that consistency, and they were also probably all colored by the same person who was all probably Javier. And I mean, another one you could throw in there is Javier Pulido. Javier Pulido comes from the Spanish School of Artists. Paolo is just like, I think he lives in San Francisco. He's just, I mean, not to make it seem like he's not like cool too. He comes from a different route in art to some degree. Also very painterly, but yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. I don't blame you for kind of connecting those two. It's kind of like, I don't know. Do you know who Dermot Mulroney and Dylan McDermott are?
No.
They're two actors that people always mix up because they have vaguely similar names. And so I kind of feel like it's like Dermot Mulroney and Dylan McDermott, where if you really looked at their art, you'd be like, there's not that much overlap, but they feel similar. Marcos and the two Javiers, I think, have a fair amount. And they have a lot of Ditko in them.
I think, yes, well said. I think those are the three I'm thinking. Paulo Rivera is on a whole another level, with all due respect to those three. His artwork is unique in a lot of different ways. I was expecting you to mention Naoko Urasawa.
Yeah, so he's one of my favorite writer-artists, for sure. 20th Century Boys is one of my two favorite comics ever. The thing about him, though, is like, it's not really... I love his art, but it's not as specifically art-oriented as the other ones that I listed. Also, I didn't think of him, so I didn't say it.
That's fair. I heard you mention him on the 400 episode. I think someone asked you a similar kind of question, and you brought him up, and obviously my ears perked up because I fucking love Pluto. But you mentioned Master Keaton, and I read Volume 1 a few months ago. When I had Chris from Comic Tropes on, he got me back on my manga train. And I was like, what else has he done? Because Chris went on about like, oh, you got to check this out. And I checked out Master Keaton, and it was the most fun I've ever had learning about history and archaeology in a comic book. So when you brought it up, I was like, yeah, someone else that found that very
Master
nerdy
Keaton's
comic book
great.
awesome.
Yeah. It's hard to go wrong with anything he does. I mean, Pluto is spectacular. 20th Century Boys is my favorite. Azador is really good. I mean, Monster is horrifying, but also very like entertaining. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about Urasawa, though, is like, it's so technically well crafted. Every story is way different. And even when it's about like serial killers or about like friends fighting off the apocalypse or things like that, it's still really fun. And I love fun in comics.
Hell yeah. Co-sign that. David, judging by your list of patrons, I was blown away when I seen some of these names, right? Like, your patrons list is not limited to, but it includes comic artists like Terry Dodson, Spider-Man editor Nick Lowe, Fiona Staples from Saga fame, and the list of comic creators and industry professionals goes on, which I feel like, that must be a big honor in itself, that people like what you're doing enough to support the brand, especially like folks that work in the industry themselves. Like, what was the moment for you that made you feel like you had made it or instilled confidence in what you were doing with Off Panel or Sketch? Was there a particular moment, or maybe like a creator supporting you or saying something to you?
I really wish I could say there was, but I think part of being in Alaska is I never really feel like I'm kind of part of it in my own way. Like, I'm kind of separate. And I mean, it's really exciting a lot of times to, have the names kind of pop in there. And, but at the same time, it's just like, if there's one thing that having the podcast has taught me, it's that these are just people, and that I try not to put them on a pedestal. Because if I put them on a pedestal, to be honest, I would like lose my mind all the time. Like, if I was just like, oh my God, how's this person talking to me right now? So I wouldn't say that there's, one that came in where I was like, oh my God. I would say probably the closest I've ever gotten is, like, I don't know if you ever get this sense, but sometimes you get a sense as to who listens to your podcast and who doesn't. And so, it's like, I knew, like, I'd talked to Fiona before, I'd talked to Terry before, I'd talked to Rom before. Like, I remember meeting Rom before, like, Rom was like really blowing up back at Comics Pro in Portland in like 2018, I think. And I mean, Rom is just like the best. Rom is such a great guy. So I knew all those people, but I remember one day I was on a treadmill and I checked my email and I saw the latest, I don't even think they go by it anymore. It used to be Milk-Fed Masterminds, but it's the Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction newsletter. And Kelly Sue DeConnick wrote this big like email doing all these different things and was kind of catching up on things that she's been enjoying. And one of the podcasts that she specifically cited was Off Panel. And there's 3 podcasts she cited, and I like legit like almost fell off my treadmill. And I was just like, I was so bewildered because I've never talked to Kelly. I've talked to Matt once, and seeing that come in, and then like Kelly started backing me on Patreon, and it has been so kind and so like thoughtful, and like will comment about like different things. Like she really wants me to read Sandman, and like sometimes I'm just like, Kelly Sudaconic wants me to read a comic because she wants me to talk about it, and like that is so bewildering to me. And anyways, I would say that's probably the one that like surprised me the most, and was the most. I was probably the coolest to me. I just like I legit like I like stumbled on my treadmill, and it is not an advisable thing to do when you're on a treadmill. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really cool to have people who read my stuff and or listen to my podcast and think that it has value and that it helps them in some sort of way. Like one of my favorite things anybody has ever told me, and I've heard this multiple times from like creators, they've told me that listening to my podcast is like listening to creators talking, or like, you know, it's like listening to people. It's like the conversations they have when they want to talk about comics. And like the fact that I can get to that level, and I can get to a place that like a depth that they're at, is really like, I don't know, that's meaningful. And it means a lot to me when people say nice things like that. Also, Brian K. Vaughan once told me I was like comic book family. And I was like, my mom had to have hacked Brian K. Vaughan's email. There's no way that this happened.
That's great. That is great. What do you remember from your first podcast episode? Because I know that it was, I've heard you mention that it was Sean Gordon Murphy out the gate, which I think is fucking a mic drop right there. But I couldn't find the episode like on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'm assuming it's probably behind a paywall or something. But what do you recall from like that first episode?
Probably the reason why you can't find it has nothing to do with the paywall. It has everything to do with the fact that I'm very bad at podcasting. I have no idea why. I didn't even know it wasn't out there. So I will look into that. Well, first off, I'll just say like it was easy to get Sean just because I'd been already doing comic stuff for 6 years by the time I had started Off Panel. And so I'd already made a lot of connections. And so, and I'd also done a lot of interviews, so I was pretty comfortable with it. So actually talking to people has never really been a problem for me. The big problem was I had no idea how to do a podcast. The first podcast I did not have headphones or a microphone, and I was in a giant room that was cavernous. And so if you ever discover that podcast, you'll probably be like, wow, this is some super subpar audio quality.
I'd be like, Brian K. Vaughan, he's a member of the family. This guy?
Yeah. This guy is must be like the hot mess family member that you guys don't talk to.
The black sheep.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I would say that, I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I learned was just steadily getting better at the technical side of the job. I had no experience with any of it, and I had to learn on the fly, and I progressively got better at it. A big part of it was listening to feedback and realizing that people are giving me feedback. It's not malicious. Like I remember one time somebody told me that like they couldn't listen to it on the subway because the audio levels were so bad. And so I figured out how to level properly, and, just figuring out how to edit properly, figuring out what I want my podcast to sound like. And so that's probably the biggest thing. In terms of interviews, I would say the biggest change is that I've just gotten more and more comfortable. I mean, I am very comfortable at talking to people, and I have no problem doing it. I mean, one time I was having dinner with some folks from comics, and I remember one of them was like, "Are you interviewing us now?" And it's just how my wife told them, they're like, "This is just how he is. Like, he's just curious, and he's just always asking questions."
Same. That has happened to me multiple times where, whether it be my girlfriend or my friends are like, hey, snap out of it. All right. That we're not in front of mics, buddy. All right. Cause I'm pitching, I'm lobbing like questions about like, so I mean, what was the real impact of that? X, Y, and Z. We're like,
oh my God,
McDonald's.
You asked way better questions than I do. I remember one time I went to the restroom when my wife and I were having breakfast, and I came back and I asked her very sincerely, I was like, are gremlins Pokemon? And, that was what the rest of our breakfast conversation was.
What was the answer?
Conceptually, yes, but it also suggested that there was another level. And then I actually talked to my friend about it later, and he said that he thinks the gremlins from Gremlins 2, they get like turn into electricity and like host like talk shows and stuff like that. That's like the final evolution where they start developing distinct personalities that can speak and things like that, or turn into a spider, much to my chagrin. I don't like spiders, but anyways, yeah. So it's just, that's my nature. If somebody wants to talk about whether or not gremlins are Pokemon, they have a podcast with me.
And there's a long form 5,000 word article coming your way soon.
Oh,
folks.
hell yeah. I mean, did you get in my journals? You know what's coming?
Speaking about, back episodes and stuff like that, I told you that I'd listened to the Hickman episode before we talked, and I did. I listened to episode 324 from 2021, so your second Hickman interview, which is kind of a flex to be able to say.
That's three. That's my third episode.
Of the three I could find, it was number 2, but it was from 2021. He's on there talking about Substack. I mean, it was during the pandemic, so, working from home. But man, the knack you have for creating like laid back, disarming, but yet like really informative conversations and the segues that you go down. Your conversations and your conversation style is such a smooth listening experience. And your convo of Hickman, I thought, was a great example. You guys started talking about like the cost of milk and how that is a good like sign of like the economy and shit like that. And then you went into talking about X-Men, and then he was very open about humble bragging about making his creative team money, which I thought was really cool to hear, like a really confident, comic creator like him. But you've mentioned that Hickman is one of those interviews and one of those people where you've come out of the interview a way better interviewer, or it makes you a better interviewer because, he'll push back, he'll force you to go down different lanes and things like that. What's the best advice you could give to an aspiring podcaster, interviewer, or someone looking to be like the next David Harper when it comes to approaching comic creators or bringing something new to comic analysis and journalism?
Don't interview Jonathan Hickman. It's really stressful. No, I like Hickman. All right. Sorry, Jonathan. If you listen to this podcast, my bad. I think that the best advice I can give a person doing anything involving all of this, or whether you're writing about, sports or competitive cooking shows or whatever, is like, you can succeed doing what everyone else does, but if you find what you want to do and you do it well, then I think you'll find more success, both in the sense that I think people will connect with what you do, and also you'll like what you do more. A part of the reason why I left Multiversity Comics back when I did was because I didn't want to do news anymore, and I didn't want to review The Walking Dead anymore, and I didn't want to write previews, write-ups anymore. I just wanted to write what I wanted to write. And I like it a lot more because of it. I'm just following my own curiosity. And so if I can give, whether it comes to interviews or whether it comes to articles you're writing or whatever, if you lean into the things that you like, and if you lean into the things that you're interested in, then you're going to be more successful than if you're just like, I don't know, asking about Batman or something like that. Like, everybody can ask about Batman, but can you ask, I don't know, the thing I always point to for people, my favorite question I've ever asked, my favorite conversation I've ever had in the podcast, I can't believe I didn't bring this up when you asked that question for 400, is Becky Cloonan came on, and in the front of her book, By Chance or Providence, she dedicates it to two people. One is to Madeline Pryor from the X-Men, and then the other one is, I think it was Madeline Pryor. Yeah. And then the other one is to Guy Davis, the artist. And like, it's like this poetic thing to Madeline Pryor. And then the next one is to Guy Davis. Thanks for the toaster oven. I asked her about the dedication, and we ended up talking about toaster ovens for like 10 minutes and like talking about like tuna melts and making stuff like that. And the thing is I think a lot of people, when they do interviews, are afraid of leaving the roadmap. And the thing is like, a roadmap is great, but you can't let it take away from the journey. That's a very like Hallmark version of what I'm trying to say, but it's just like the journey comes from like following your curiosities and following the things you're interested in, whether that's toaster ovens or Stiltman or whatever. if you're going to do something that represents you and represents you well and is going to be something you're going to enjoy doing for a while, if you try to just do what everyone else does, you're not going to like it and you're not going to be good at it. Do what works for you and you'll find more success.
Well said. And it sounds like sketched Hallmark cards are coming very soon.
Oh, don't tempt me.
David, there's one last thing I'll ask of you before I let you go and we start wrapping up. And that's hoping that you can join me for the last segment of the show, which is a celebration and preview of some new comics and can't miss titles coming out next month. We like to call this our Fistful of Comics segment, and this is how we kick it off.
You can either have a mouthful of tea or a fistful of comics.
Fistful of Comics is the segment dedicated to helping all you comic-curious newbies and loyal Wednesday warriors find the best new comics, find the best starting points, and creative teams that you can't afford to miss. And always down to help us with that mission is our friend Ben Kingsbury, the owner of Jacksonville's premier comic shop, Gotham City Limit. He's a fantastic comic shop owner. There's no one better you could ask about the best new comics coming out than Ben Kingsbury. He's got a sixth sense for finding great comics, is what I'll say. So let's get some music going and see what he's got for us today. Kicking things off, Ben has got not only a very interesting new comic series coming out from Scout Comics, but he's also got some words of wisdom when it comes to simplifying your comic buying process. So add this to the index, the Immediacy Index that David brought up, and I think you got a good formula. Here's Ben.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, Shortbox listener. I'm Ben K, representing Gotham City Limit in Jacksonville, Florida. And these are my 3 final order cutoff comics you should add to your pull list immediately. First up, Scout Comics presents Space Outlaw #1. You know, the best part of going through all these badass comics coming out each week is that I've pretty much figured out what I want to read just by some simple bulletin points. Does the following comic contain space, outlaws, alien bounty hunters, a protagonist who's actually the universe's most deadly villain? Check, check, check. Yep, check again.
Once again, that was Space Outlaw #1. Writer, artist, cover artist, variant cover artist, all done by one man, Marco Fontanelli. This new Western sci-fi series is coming out through Scout Comics and hit shops on July 12th. All right, next up, this next pick will have you either seeing green or possibly purple if you've been looking for a reason to bust out your best Bruce Banner or Hulk cosplay early. Take it away, Ben.
Next up, The Incredible Hulk #1, the newest volume to the Legacy Incredible Hulk series. And no, as much as I love the writer Donny Cates, who previously did the last Hulk run, this is not your Inception Hulk anymore. Back to the Age of Monsters, where Hulk originally began. Fun fact, did you know Hulk was inspired by DC Solomon Grundy? That's why the Hulk was originally gray, not the green you know him for now. However, I digress. I think I can speak for all Hulk fans when we say all we really want to see is Hulk smash!
I'm telling you, what other comic segment is giving you words of wisdom, tinfoil hat theories, and comic trivia, all right? Only through Ben Kingsbury. Once again, that is The Incredible Hulk #1. This new chapter for Marvel's famous Jade Giant comes to you from the creative team of Philip K. Johnson and Nick Klein and Matt Wilson. You can pick it up on June 21st. And last but not least is a knockout punch in comic book form. Here's pick number 3 for you.
And last but not least this week, Boom Studios presents Creed Next Round, #1 of a 4-part series. You know what's harder than creating one dynastic movie empire? Doing it a second time. That's why I think the 3 Creed movies, which follow the original dynastic movie empire of Rocky Balboa, have done a fantastic job carrying on the Rocky spirit, i.e. grit, hard work, and a never-give-up attitude. Now comes a comic set 10 years after Creed 3, which promises some illegal underground street fighting. All I can hope for is some Jean-Claude Van Damme Lionheart street fight vibes. Well, another week has come and gone, and I'm still Ben K, representing Gotham City Limit in Jacksonville, Florida. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility, and always take it to the limit.
Once again, that was Creed Next Round, number 1, that comes out June 28th. All right, David, we got our options. Which one of his options are you, piqued your interest the most? Like, which one would you realistically put on your pull list?
It's a tough selection. Space Outlaw, that one's the easiest cut. It has got big Pitch Black energy to it. I love Pitch Black, but there's only one Pitch Black. And it's not Riddick and it's not Chronicles of Riddick. It's the original Pitch Black. The other two, I mean, Incredible Hulk's the obvious pick. I love Nick Klein. His art is incredible. Matt Wilson coloring him's fantastic. But I have to pick Creed. Creed's the pick for me just because I always say that there needs to be more sports comics. And so if I don't support a sports comic in this in this segment, I would seem like a liar. But then on top of that, the Creed movies are great. The Rocky movies are great. Well, some of them are great. Some of them are just deeply ridiculous. But the Creed movies are great. I haven't watched Creed 3 yet because it came out while I was on vacation, but I am very interested in watching it, especially because I read that Michael B. Jordan brought some anime influences into it. I just like Michael B. Jordan brings a really great energy to storytelling. And so the idea that he's bringing this in with a really great team working on it as well and continuing the story in an interesting way, that's pretty promising. It's an interesting way to take a licensed property, and it's a very unusual licensed property. So I am genuinely curious as to what they cook up with that. That is, I remember when I got the press release, I was very surprised by it, but it makes sense, and it'll be cool to see what they come up with for that.
You've got to watch Creed 3. It was amazing. And yeah, the anime influences, amazing. I'm going to go with Space Outlaw just because this is a new auteur. And for me, I'm not familiar with Marco's work, and the fact that he's doing seems like pretty hands-on. I'm curious to see just how he brings his vision to life, being, completely in control of it. And it's a new number 1 through Scout Comics. I feel like they've been on a pretty strong run in regards to putting out some new stuff. And I'm always down to support independent publishers and smaller publishers trying to put their name out like that. So I'm going to say Space Outlaw. And the premise, too, sounds pretty badass. Space Outlaw on the run from robots or killer robots and stuff like that. Sign me up.
Yeah.
And just a reminder for everyone tuning in, Ben's picks will be linked in the show notes. So if any of those titles pique your interest, check them out and make sure you get your pre-orders in for your local comic shops right now. And remember, even if you don't live in Jax, you can still take it to the limit. Comics, collectibles, and exclusive variant covers you won't find anywhere else are all available on GothamCityLimit.com. Big shout outs to Ben one more time.
Also, Duval. Sorry, I had to do it one more time.
I love it. I appreciate it. David, I'm going to have links for Off Panel and Sketched listed in these show notes. So people can follow along with the projects you got going on, and that way they can see this Gremlin Pokemon long form article come to life. Yeah. Do you have anything else that you want to share with the listeners, like upcoming projects, special announcements, parting words, et cetera, et cetera? Take it away.
Only that Shin Godzilla introduces the idea that Godzilla himself could be a Pokemon. So I have a lot of things to think about after this podcast. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it a lot, and continue doing all the great things that you do for the world of comics. Enjoy the rest of your night. Go Heat, and just know that you're always welcome back. Thanks, man.
Also, Celtics are up 32-20. I'm sorry.
God damn.
I was going to tell you earlier, but I didn't want to throw off your flow.
Fine. You should have actually just jumped in with that. That's
it looks like Tatum has decided to be serious about the game of basketball today.
Of course he would. And there you have it, Shortbox Nation. That's the end of the show. If you made it this far, it's probably safe to say you enjoyed this episode. So do me a favor. Help us spread the word, all right? Send and share this episode with a friend or someone you know that loves comics as much as we do. And if you're feeling extra generous and if you got like 10 seconds to spare, leave us some kind words, all right? Leave us a 5-star rating review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share what you like about this podcast with the rest of the world because it would mean a lot to us, right? It would really help us out. Now, I promise I'd take care of the housekeeping items right here, right? I saved the best for last in a way. So here's those important announcements I wanted to share. First and foremost, the Duval Comic and Zine Fest is taking place back in Jax on Saturday, June 10th from 1 to 5 p.m. It'll take place at the Jax Public Library downtown. This free event will feature over 35 local creators of independent and self-published zines, small press, and do-it-yourself mixed media. I'll be there enjoying the festivities as well as hosting a panel with special guest speaker Leela Corman, who is an acclaimed zine maker. We'll be talking about what it's like being an independent comic creator, self-expression, and a whole lot more. If this event is even a fraction of what it was like last year, then you won't want to miss it. It'll be another can't-miss event here in Jax. So start making plans to come out for the Duval Comic and Zine Fest on Saturday, June 10th. In terms of next week's episode, you can expect a Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse movie review next Wednesday with the usual suspects from our Shortbox movie watch party. So expect the return of Blythe and Drew and a special guest co-host that I am beyond excited to have join us for that episode. So you have to come back Wednesday to see who the special guest co-host is. So make sure you watch Across the Spider-Verse before that episode comes out, because I would love to hear what you guys have to say, all right? So get your emails and your opinions and thoughts ready. Speaking of emails, don't forget about our Boom Studios Comic Bundle giveaway contest that was announced in last week's show when we had Greg from Boom Studios on the podcast. The rules were really simple. You write us a short email via the shortboxjacks@gmail.com, or you send us a DM via Instagram or Twitter telling us what's your favorite comic series from Boom Studios. It could be a current series or maybe one that was recently ended. Whatever, just tell us what's your favorite Boom Studios comic series, and we'll pick a winner or two to win some free comics and some exclusive variants that was given to me. I'm here to spread the wealth. So write us an email or send us that DM. It doesn't matter where you live, too. If you live outside of Jax, well, guess what? I'm going to mail those comics to you free of charge. So this contest is open to all of the Shortbox Nation in the U.S. So get your prompts sent in the next week or two, all right? We'll be announcing the winners very soon. Maybe not next episode, but maybe the episode after that. And last but not least, if you're someone that's been enjoying the show lately and you want to support us in the best way possible, if you want to take your support to the next level, consider joining the Shortbox family over on patreon.com/theshortbox. Outside of feeling good about supporting an independent podcast, you'll also be treated to your very own private podcast feed, early access to all of our content before everyone else, and you'll get access to a bunch of bonus episodes, as well as our spin-off podcast series that should keep you plenty entertained. If any of that sounds enticing to you, please consider joining our Patreon community over at patreon.com/theshortbox. You can sign up for a month to see if it's a good fit for you, and you can cancel if not. It's all good. Regardless, we'd appreciate it, and thanks again to everyone supporting us already. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Go read some comics. Go read the comics that you've got in a stack in the corner that you've been meaning to, all right? Do me that one solid. Go read your comic books. And most importantly, continue to make mine and yours Shortbox. I'll talk to you next week. Peace.